So now the final thing we need to do is be able to use these minified versions in our template. But the trick is that we don't want to use them all the time. We only want to use them when we're ready to push our site or our template into production. So what's the best way to go about that? Now again, we talked about what we would manually have to do. I'm going to go back to the editor and look at our index.html, which is cutting out our JavaScript files and CSS files and pasting in the minified versions. And possibly that would be what we ended up committing to a certain branch in our version control system. And then we'd have to undo all of that in order to continue development. But if we use an automator, we can easily swap between the two, which allows for easier testing and fewer errors. So now it took me a little bit to figure out what the best plugin for this is, but it ends up being something called Injector, grunt-injector. So I'm going to go back to our Chrome page. I'll close out a couple windows, and I'm going to do a search for grunt-injector. And there's a couple places we can get this, but in general, you'll be happier going to the GitHub pages as a front-end developer and someone who's not working with Node specifically. So I'm going to go to this page here. I'm going to scroll down, and we'll go through the process of installing this and enabling it in our grunt file. So I'll copy this command, and I'll go to the command line. I'll paste it in and hit enter. And then we'll copy this next line and add it to our grunt file to enable it. Jump over to our grunt file in the editor, paste this line in, save it, and I'll go back and look for some examples. So the idea is that you add some HTML comments inside of your template, and they follow a particular convention. The default convention is the word injector, colon, and then the extension of the file or files you want to inject there. And then another comment which says end injector. So in this example, it would be injecting CSS files between these two comments and JS files, JavaScript files, between these two comments. In the example that you see here, it's saying that it's going to put everything that's inside of any folder that has a JavaScript extension into the JavaScript tag, and anything that has a CSS extension into the CSS tag. Now this is pretty close to what we want here. So I'm just going to copy this configuration, and I'll go back to our grunt file. And after our CSS min section, I'm going to paste this in here, and I'll add a trailing comma just to make sure we don't run into that error we had previously again. And now what we're going to want here is two different versions of this task. In the one version, the one for development, we're going to want all of these files included on their own. And in the production version, we're going to want just the minified version of our CSS and JavaScript included. Let's start with our development version. So here's Injector. We have empty options. Now for this one, we're going to need to add an option. So we'll leave this here for now. And then we have the name of this version of the task, local dependencies. Now I'm going to replace this with the word dev, because that describes more of what we're doing here. This is for development. The template that we're going to adjust is our index.html, so we'll leave that there. But then we're going to need to replace the JS and CSS here. So I'm going to cut these out. And now I could just copy and paste all of the items in our JS and our CSS arrays here, but we almost always want to reduce repetition wherever we can. So a better thing to do would be to separate out these items into their own arrays and include them here and here, as well as inside of our injector. That way, if we add a CSS or JavaScript file later, it will get updated in both places. Now again, if you're new to JavaScript or to coding in general, this might look a little scary, but we're going to create a variable and assign an array to it. Very similar to what we've done in our Sass files, except we're using an array now. So up here in our module exports function, before we get to the init config, we're going to create a variable. I'm going to call one files.js, and I'll just assign it an empty array for now. And we'll call one files.css, and we'll assign it an empty array. And now what we'll do is cut everything here, and I'll cut the full array, and I'll replace it with the name of our variable, files.js, and I'll paste it here to replace our empty array. And then I'll do the same thing with our CSS. We'll replace it with the name files.css, and I'll paste over the empty array here. I'm going to save this and run grunt on the command line just to make sure that we're doing what we think we're doing. So I'll type in grunt to run this. Sure enough, we have our JavaScript concatenated, our CSS concatenated, and everything minified, no problems. Okay, So now in our injector, we're going to end up including an array of arrays, which is still valid within this structure. So within this array, we're going to do files.js, and we're also going to include files.css. And now if we want this to run during grunt, we're going to copy the injector name and add it here under the default task, right there. Okay, now the other part to this, if we go back to the documentation, is that we need to add in these tags inside of our index.html file. So I'll copy the CSS tags. I'll go back to our editor and to our index.html file. And our CSS, we're still going to want in the header. So I'm just going to paste it here below all of our other links. Eventually, we'll end up removing these once our injector is working right. And then I'll go back to the browser, and I'm going to copy the lines for our JavaScript here. And I'll go back to our index.html file, and I'll scroll down to the very bottom and paste it here right before the ending body tag. We'll save this. Now we should be able to run this on the command line. Okay, so now we get some details when injector dev is running. We injected 8 JavaScript files and 4 CSS files. And if we looked at our index.html file now, you can see that between our comments, we have our scripts being loaded in, and up above for our CSS, we have our CSS files being pulled in. So at this point, we can safely remove all of our links and scripts here. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll remove our scripts from the bottom as well, since we're pulling them in here, and I'll save it.